Roosevelt won a landslide election to become the 32nd president. FDR, the two-term governor of New York, brought a feeling of energy and optimism to the Oval Office.
Let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
FDR's campaign song, "Happy Days Are Here Again," was symbolic of his positive, take-charge approach as president. And with a Democratic majority in both houses of Congress, he was able to make swift reforms that became known as the New Deal. In just his first 100 days in office, FDR proposed and Congress approved more than 15 new pieces of legislation aimed at providing relief for the needy, recovery for the faltering economy, and reform of the American financial system. Just one day after becoming president, FDR declared a bank holiday, closing all banks and preventing any further withdrawals of money by depositors who had lost faith in the banking system. Then, he persuaded Congress to pass the Emergency Banking Relief Act, authorizing the U.S. Treasury Department to inspect the country's banks and allow only those that were financially solvent to reopen. The act offered loans to those banks which needed assistance, and with the creation of the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, or FDIC, which provided federal insurance for bank depositors, Americans began to cautiously trust the banks once more. The Federal Securities Act helped to restore public confidence in the stock market, as did the establishment of the Securities and Exchange Commission, which prevented the manipulation of stock prices. Perhaps the most confidence-inspiring action by the new president occurred only 8 days after his inauguration. Roosevelt took to the airwaves as millions gathered around their radios for his first fireside chat. He explained in simple terms the steps he had taken to reform the American economy. Roosevelt's direct, personal approach to the American people was reassuring and helped him garner the support of Americans to enact several more policies in his push toward recovery. The Civilian Conservation Corps, the CCC, was formed to put young men to work. The CCC planted 200 million trees in the Great Plains to prevent future soil erosion and built roads, parks, and flood control systems. The pay was only $30 a month, but almost 3 million men got much-needed employment. Meanwhile, the Federal Emergency Relief Administration provided $500 million in direct aid to the homeless, unemployed, and ill. The New Deal also created the PWA, the Public Works Administration, which provided funds to the states so that they could build schools, libraries, and other community buildings and create jobs for their citizens. When the PWA failed to diminish unemployment quickly enough, Roosevelt launched the CWA, the Civil Works Administration. The CWA created more than 4 million jobs, and workers built 40,000 schools and 500,000 miles of roads. In June of 1933, FDR's administration was able to pass the National Industrial Recovery Act, NIRA. It established a code of fair practices for various industries and set prices to ensure fair competition. The act also recommended minimum wages and maximum hours for workers. Meanwhile, the Tennessee Valley Authority was organized to build dams that provided electricity, flood control, and of course many jobs for poor farmers in several southern states. That same year, Roosevelt also submitted the Agricultural Adjustment Act, which limited crop production in order to increase crop prices and help reduce surplus. Despite launching all these wide-sweeping new pieces of legislation, some critics felt the administration still hadn't gone far enough in helping the poor and reforming the economy. Some feared the New Deal was mostly benefiting already wealthy business owners and that it gave too much power to the government. Even ex-President Herbert Hoover was a vocal critic of FDR's New Deal policies.
We have seen the creation of a most gigantic spending bureaucracy. That is not only a reduction of your standard of living, but of your freedom and your hopes.
By 1935, the Supreme Court decided that the NIRA was unconstitutional, saying that its enforcement of federal employment codes went beyond the government's powers. The following year, it held that the Agricultural Adjustment Act was unconstitutional as well, because agricultural controls and regulations should be decided by individual states. Dismayed and fearing conservatives and the Supreme Court might unravel the New Deal, FDR proposed an intriguing bill to Congress. Roosevelt's so-called Court Reform Bill would have added 6 more justices to the Supreme Court. Justices he, as president, would nominate. It was obvious that FDR would choose those sympathetic to his New Deal policies. The proposal was promptly nicknamed the Court Packing Bill. The bill failed and tarnished Roosevelt's image. Regardless, because of court resignations, the president was able to appoint 7 new justices in the next 4 years who did support his policies. But FDR hadn't seen the last of his critics. Roman Catholic priest and radio broadcaster Father Charles Coughlin reached over 40 million listeners each week as he challenged the New Deal. Coughlin wanted a guaranteed annual income for Americans and a nationalization of banks. In time, however, his anti-Semitic comments cost him most of his supporters. Dr. Francis Townsend, another outspoken opponent to FDR's policies, claimed Roosevelt wasn't doing enough to help the elderly. Townsend won widespread support with his demand for a national pension plan.
This money to be collected by the government and returned directly to the people from whom it was collected in the form of pensions every 30 days.
Most vocal was Louisiana Governor and then Senator Huey Long. Although a supporter of Roosevelt at first, later Long had nothing but criticism for him. The Kingfish, as Long was often called, intended to run for the presidency and championed a nationwide social program called Share Our Wealth.
Well, we've had the promises from the president many, many times, and now we're wanting a fulfillment. No empty words, no empty messages mean anything to us, and no kind of law except one that gives employment and homes and comfort and education to our people will satisfy us in the least.
A great many Americans agreed with the Kingfish, and more than 27,000 Share the Wealth clubs sprang up across the country. In 1935, at the height of his popularity, Long was assassinated.